We're grateful for the opportunity to gather, though virtually, on this land, and we thank the generations of indigenous people who have taken care of the land long before other nation groups came. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional territories of the Ojibwe, the Ashnab, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, whose territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We also recognize the contributions that the Métis, Inuit, First Nations, and other indigenous people have made in shaping and strengthening this province and this country as a whole. Today's session is for the benefit of our board of directors, our management volunteers, and our patient advisory and advocacy council as we work to improve our advocacy skill sets in order to ensure that individuals living with sickle cell disease receive the right care at the right time, no matter where they live in the province. It is only through advocacy that we can make our voice louder and we can get policies that we ensure that every individual affected by sickle cell disease also have access to equitable care. So without taking much more time, I'd like to welcome you again to today's session. And similar to Advocacy 101 that we had last year, we have engaged our good friends at Counsel Public Affairs to support today's session. We have Devan Somerville and Kiki Chakota, and without taking much more of your time, I'd like to introduce the Counsel Public Affairs team to the podium. And I thank you again for being part of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lanre, and thank you to everybody who's joined us on this Saturday morning. And as Lanre mentioned, I am joined by my colleague Kiki, who will be helping us with the presentation today. For those who aren't familiar, Counsel Public Affairs is a government relations consulting firm. We're located in Toronto, that's our head office, but we have offices across the country in Ottawa, Winnipeg, Regina, Calgary, Vancouver, and Victoria now. But of course, it's myself and a few of my colleagues who've worked most closely with Lanre and with the team at SCAGO over the past year on a number of issues of importance for your engagement with the Ontario provincial government. And you know, my background is both in government relations consulting, but I've also worked on the other side, worked in the government. I was an assistant to Premier Dalton McGuinty, and then subsequently a senior policy advisor to several ministers of government, most latterly the two ministers of municipal affairs and housing on land use planning and development files. But since joining council in the fall of 2014, I've worked on a whole variety of different issues, including for the past year and a bit on issues related to sickle cell disease, which has been a great issue to work on with Lanre. You are, I think, fortunate to have as your leader someone who is tirelessly dedicated to advocacy and in being an effective advocate at Queen's Park. And that's, I think, really what we want to touch on today is talking about the basic foundational pieces of advocacy, but I think we can take it another step further this time for those who participated in the last session, because there's a lot of exciting things I think we can kind of illustrate for you about how to put that advocacy into practice. So with that, I'll just ask Kiki to load up the presentation and then we'll get underway. Okay. Okay, if you can just go to the first slide after this, Kiki. So in terms of our presentation today, the general structure and some of the content will be familiar to those who were able to join us for the last session. But for those who weren't, we will cover some of the same ground. So you won't be starting from a place of not really understanding some of the background information. That being said, we do want to dive a little bit deeper today into the process by which advocates can get directly engaged with the Ontario government on important issues. And apologies if you're hearing any background noise, as my toddler is being wrangled by 3 adults, but even still, he may be a match for them. Nonetheless, want to cover issues about understanding what advocacy is, an introduction to the Ontario government, and as I said, a deeper dive into how advocates can get involved in the process of new laws, regulations, and policies being made, and then putting that advocacy into action. And I think the most exciting thing about this session today is SCAGO has a real example over the past year, and in particular over the past 6 months, where you have achieved a tremendous success, and that is the introduction and passage of Bill 255, which is an effort that Lanre has been working tirelessly on, and that is the act that's now in law for Sickle Cell Awareness Day and Thalassemia Awareness Day. And that means that now in Ontario, June 19th, year after, is always to be Sickle Cell Awareness Day. And the process by which that success was achieved, I think really helps illustrate exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about being an effective advocate. So if you could go to the next slide, Kiki. Okay, so at each section here, we are going to take a pause in case there are any questions. I know there is a chat function here that you can use if you have any questions, and Kiki will take a look at each section at the end and let us know if there's anything there. I will look as well. So in terms of what is government advocacy? Well, most simply, government advocacy is an activity by an individual or group, such as SCAGO, that aims to influence decisions within a political institution. So advocacy can make a lot of difference because decision makers are going to react to credible individuals or group who effectively bring their issues to the forefront of the public agenda. Effective being the key word, because there are a lot of issues that are presented, but it's how you do it. And I think there's some counterpoint examples we'll be able to touch on here as well. In the case of advocating to the government, they have competing interests and concerns that can only be fully discerned when people make their voices heard. The government's making decisions all the time on complicated issues. They don't naturally know where all the problems are, where all the sensitivities are, or where all the opportunities are. And so that's why they need to hear from interested groups such as SCAGO to understand how they can be helpful or how they're in the way of something working better. And as well, as voters and taxpayers, we of course have the ability to affect change. Next slide. So in terms of what we can advocate for, there's any number of different things. Obviously, one of them that people naturally think of is government funding. Typically groups are going to engage with government to ask for funding for a sector, an area of infrastructure, or in the cases of nonprofit organizations and charities, direct funding for their respective organizations. This often takes place in different periods. It can happen throughout the course of the year. It gets particularly active in the months ahead of the government developing its annual budget, because there is formal processes by which those issues are brought to the government's attention and consideration, but there's lots of informal things that happen in that way as well, and it happens all the time. I know, for example, in the case of SCAGO, that there are ongoing conversations about support for clinics, support for those healthcare resources at the front line that are supporting individuals living with sickle cell disease, particularly in communities where those resources are understaffed or undersupported relative to the need. So those conversations are often ongoing with the Ministry of Health, and they're a bit continuous. In terms of awareness efforts, so this type of advocacy, very common among nonprofits and charities, really was the crux of the Bill 255 efforts, is to try and spread awareness of the group's issues, the efforts that you're undertaking, the challenges that your groups or their members face. And this type of success can look like awareness campaigning. It can get government actors to speak in support of your organization or your issue. And of course, the big examples, like in the case of Bill 255 this year, are creating an awareness day or some sort of a officially designated event in which the issues that your group or organization face are going to really be brought into the limelight on a continual basis. Creates a great opportunity to also continue to talk to them always, because they need to understand the details of your issues. If you think of an MPP elected from any community in Ontario, all the different issues they could possibly be working on at any given time or hearing about from local residents or groups, provincial or local, you can't presume they're going to understand or know the issues and challenges that you face. So there's that constant need for awareness. There's also advocacy to prevent a negative action. You know, this is one that people sometimes forget about, which of course is where you're either dealing with government consultations for a proposed change or something that's anticipated to happen, where you're trying to prevent the government from either passing a law or making a new regulation or a new policy that's going to have a negative impact on a business, an organization, individuals or groups that either represent. Now, this is particularly important as it's often, as I said, in conjunction of a consultation on legislation or regulation, and it can be very critical to make those changes before they are passed into law or passed into regulation, amending them, improving them, because it can be quite a bit harder to do that after the fact. You know, sometimes preventing negative action can be, the advocacy can be done very constructively, but at times it has to take, or does ultimately take, for better or for worse, a negative tone. Sometimes the stakes are so high and the responsiveness from the government so low that groups will take a very public and oppositional stance because they are trying to change the underlying political calculation by bringing more public awareness to the issue and why it's a problem. But that's a tactic that has to always be used very carefully, because in our world of government relations, that kind of approach can be a little bit of a bridge burning exercise, to use a term, that if you go down that route to prevent a negative action, you may forego any ability to have positive conversations going forward with that government, very easily at least. But sometimes the stakes are that high and it has to happen. In terms of also legislative, regulatory, and policy change, you know, these are happening all the time. Sometimes it's proactive to encourage the government to make a change to a law, a regulation, or a policy to positively impact the interests of the group or those they represent. And sometimes it's about feedback to a process that they're already undertaking that may not be about preventing a negative action so much as trying to improve it, making sure that the nuances or the unique considerations of that group are factored in appropriately. So as you can see, there's so many different things you could at any time be advocating for. And I know in the case of SCAGO, that in our work with Lanre and with members of your organization, we have dealt with a number of these different areas of advocacy on different issues at the same time. So it is always a careful balance. Next slide. You know, who your audience is important too, because how you advocate and in what sequence you do it is always an ongoing consideration that you have to take. But most importantly, you're almost never advocating to just one group or one audience. It's about trying to create a breadth of understanding and also a breadth of potential supporters and champions to help you get the changes you're looking for. Obviously, the minister, and in the case of SCAGO, that's the Minister of Health in Ontario, and their office is key, because ultimately that's the minister who oversees the ministry that will make the vast majority of decisions directly affecting individuals living with sickle cell disease and organizations like SCAGO. And they're going to be the ones who are going to bring items to cabinet and really be most influential in shaping that decision, but not the only ones. And we'll talk about a few of those terms in a minute. The minister's office, of course, is almost even more important on a day-to-day basis. Their chief of staff, other key political staffers in her office or his office, in this case, it's the Minister of Health, Christine Elliott. They're key allies when advocating for a policy or any issues. They're effectively the minister's advisors. Those are the people that the minister is going to be talking to before really making any decision. You're going to spend a lot more time talking with them than you will with the minister themselves. As well, you have the senior civil servants, such as the deputy minister, the assistant deputy minister, or directors in the Ministry of Health. These are the career officials of government. They do not change when there is an election. They remain in place. And they're the institutional knowledge and the day-to-day running of the ministry. And of course, they're going to be very important to advising both the minister and the office of the minister. But as well, when any kind of major decision is taking place, so something that's legislation, regulation, major policy issues, there's going to be further approvals required. You're going to have potentially the Premier's office. You may have other ministers, cabinet committees that are made up of groups of ministers, not to mention other MPPs, other members of the legislature that may be influential, as well as other outside organizations that would likely be consulted or influential on any decision that the government makes. So I'll just pause there if we can go to the next slide, and want to see if anyone had any questions before we go any further. Okay, well, with that, then we'll go to the next section here and give you a bit more of an introduction into the Ontario government. And some of this material we've covered before, but much of it is going to be fairly new. It is a little bit dense. So certainly, if you have any questions, bring them at the end of the section. I'll do my best to give you a sense of it without going too into detail, because it can be overwhelming. But it is important to understand, because it really will show both how much goes on behind the scenes that the public may not see, but also what are those opportunities that you have to be most impactful in terms of your advocacy, because timing really can be everything. Next slide. So if we look at this, first of all, people need to, I think most importantly, know, what is an MPP? So an MPP, a member of provincial parliament, is one of 124 such members who are elected to represent the concerns of their constituents within a geographic area regarding provincial responsibilities at the legislature, as well as locally in their ridings. That's the electoral districts in Ontario are called ridings traditionally, but electoral districts is equally appropriate. Ontario is the only province that calls them members of provincial parliament, MPPs. Of course, in much of Ontario, the very same geographical entities also have a member of parliament, which is a federal representative, but they're called MPPs for the context of the Ontario legislature, also known as Queen's Park. Basically, in other provinces, they're called MLAs or MNAs, depending on the province you're talking about. So each riding has one representative, one MPP, and as you can see, the breakdown here is color-coded right now. So this is the current Ontario legislature. You have a majority PC party government, 72 members under Premier Doug Ford. There are 40 NDP members who represent the official opposition, as well as a number of other MPPs, 8 Liberal Party MPPs from the Ontario Liberal Party, 1 Green Party MPP, which is Mike Schreiner in Guelph, as well as 3 independent members. And all 3 of those independent members were formerly members of the PC Party caucus, who subsequently, for a variety of reasons, had left caucus. When I use the word caucus, just for your understanding, that refers to all the elected members from a particular party. So the 72 PC members would be the PC Party caucus, the 40 NDP members would be the NDP caucus, so on and so forth. They'll hold regular meetings at Queen's Park that are not part of the sort of official functioning of the legislature, but are basically to allow that caucus to address any number of issues that might be coming up, whether in the legislature or on issues that are ultimately affecting members. At the legislature itself, the MPPs from different parties can be assigned, they will be assigned different roles by the party leader. They might, so an MPP will be designated as House Leader, another will be designated as Party Whip. That the Party Whip is basically in charge of the vote counting and vote organizing on various votes that take place at the legislature. They'll also have essentially deputies among the MPPs who will do that work as well. They also are going to have roles on committees. So all party members, all members of the legislature are going to serve on legislative committees. We'll talk a little bit about what the roles of those are, but they'll usually serve on more than one. And then within the government party, so the PC Party caucus, there ultimately will be also cabinet ministers who oversee the different ministries of government, so oversee the departments of the civil service, and then parliamentary assistants to each of those ministers who effectively help them with some of the procedural work in the legislature on behalf of their ministry. So that could be, for example, when they have question period, if the minister is absent from the legislature, the parliamentary assistant may be the one who will answer questions from the opposition. They may be the one who oversee or participate in certain debates on various bills that would affect the minister. There's any number of things that that parliamentary assistant would do in the legislature. On the flip side, the opposition parties will also have critics. They will have designated individuals from their membership as critics. And the job of those members is really to focus on asking the questions of government pertaining to those areas of responsibility. So you would have a critic on health, for example, and their job would be to ask the Minister of Health about issues of interest, to press the Minister of Health on those issues, as well as to really be the specialist within caucus on issues pertaining to that area of responsibility. And those roles, critic roles, really can be changed whenever they choose, although they tend to stay in place for quite some time. Next slide. We'll talk a little bit here about cabinet ministers and ministries. I should mention as well, though, that in terms of MPPs from every party, they really have a lot of responsibilities, not only at Queen's Park in Toronto, but back home in their communities. They're frequently there, especially now during COVID. They have meetings with constituents, try to resolve all kinds of local matters for individuals and groups relating to provincial government services. They attend community events, whether that be related to provincial investments or just things in the community that are relevant. Obviously, that connection to community is very important because those are going to be the folks who, of course, are going to be either re-electing them or not in the next election, whenever that may take place. Of course, as I mentioned, in Ontario today, we have a majority government, a PC government. Basically, you have a majority government whenever one party, in this case, the PC party, has more than 54 of the seats in the legislature. Anytime there are one party holds less than 54 seats, they can still form government, but it's a minority government. It is dependent on other parties voting in support of what they call confidence motions, which really means budgets and throne speeches, which are sort of those big pieces. And thus, the government or the opposition have a lot more power to trigger an election. In a majority government, the election dates are fixed. They're set out in law, and they essentially take place on a 4-year cycle. The next one will be taking place next year, next June. June of 2022 will be the next Ontario election. So just ahead now to the cabinet ministers page, we've already got it up here. Just go back one. Thanks, Kiki. There are 24 ministries currently in the Ontario government. They include, but are not limited to issues like health, long-term care, finance, education, the Attorney General, children, community and social services, transportation, colleges and universities, and quite a number of others. So effectively, the Premier, in this case, Premier Ford, is the head of the provincial government, and he is responsible for working with his cabinet ministers to develop policies and set the priorities of government. So the ministers are all MPPs. They are selected by the Premier to form his cabinet, and they are chosen at his discretion and can be changed at his discretion. Practically speaking, he'll take a lot of advice from his office staff about who those individuals should be, and there's a lot of careful considerations that go into the construction of a cabinet. There's no restriction on the Premier to for how many ministers he has to have or how few. He can change the number of ministers and ministries as well as who they are, as I said, at his discretion. There's 24 at present, as I noted, as well as 5 associate ministers. Collectively, the cabinet really makes the major decisions of government about policies and priorities, including the provincial budgets, and cabinet ministers can introduce legislation for consideration in the House. They introduce the government bills, as we'll call them, relevant to their individual ministries. The ministries, as we talk of them, they're the bureaucratic sectors of government or departments of government each led by a minister, seconded by a deputy minister. And the deputy minister is a career official. Each is responsible for a different area of government. They come together to form what's called the Ontario Public Service. And as I noted, a deputy minister in each leads the policy development and implementation to support the work of government. And all those deputy ministers report to an individual called the Secretary of Cabinet. And that Secretary of Cabinet is the senior most civil servant in the Ontario government, senior most bureaucrat, career official, and they report to the Premier. And each of those ministries are then broken down into smaller parts that deal with different parts of those ministries' responsibilities. You know, people will talk about what's in different jurisdictions. As you see here, the province really deals with most of those issues that we would see as relevant to the day-to-day lives of people here in Ontario. When you look at the federal government, what do they deal with? So not the Ontario government, but the federal government it's much more national in scope. It's national defense, it's foreign affairs, you know, dealing with other countries. It's taxes, federal taxes, not provincial, but federal taxes, the post office, fisheries, railroads, Indigenous laws and rights, issues of citizenship, marriage and divorce, currency. Many of those things we think about as the functions of government on a day-to-day basis, like health, like education, like social services, highways, colleges and universities, and so forth. It's all a provincial responsibility. So a lot of that takes place in Toronto at Queen's Park. Next slide. So really when we're talking about the major types of decisions by government, or the levers by which government can set rules or requirements or policies, there's really sort of three buckets. And this is a little bit simplified, but I think for this, it's a good introduction. So you have, at the highest level, you have legislation. So that's a law or a set of laws that have been passed by government through the legislature. It's also used to describe the act of making a new law. This is when you're talking about bills and legislation. It's probably the highest, most firm, also most complicated process to change government policy. Probably the one that is most difficult to achieve. And I think that's when we talk about Bill 255, it will be really remarkable what SCAGO was able to accomplish in such a short time. Regulation is a little bit more straightforward in that it's not a decision of the legislature, but rather of the elected government. So they don't have to go for votes in the legislature to change the rules or laws. Regulations are basically instructions that guide the implementation, interpretation, enforcement, or administration of a law. So they make it possible for the government to really provide all the details and rules and procedures of how a new law is going to work without having to go in and introduce and pass a new law and have it voted on, because that's a time-consuming process that often is also not very useful, because many times regulations need to be updated on an ongoing basis just to account for changes, for new issues. And if you had to do that every time by going back into legislation, it would be incredibly onerous, and it would be very likely that many things would never get accomplished. Regulation has to go through a process too. It is somewhat time consuming, but less so and less onerous than legislation. In a majority government, the legislation really can go at the speed that the government wants it to go, because they have a majority of votes, and thus they can really pass whatever bill, proposed legislation they want, if they can just decide to bring their votes together to do it. In a minority government, much harder to pass any legislation, because you need to negotiate with different parties to pass any legislation, and it's often very difficult to do that. So minority governments, you'll often see very little legislation passed compared to a majority government. And then policy is really a statement from government, a statement from the ministries about the intent or how they are going to interpret laws or regulations. This is really issued either in a manner that's set out in law and regulation, or really at the will of the government. These are very flexible tools, but they also tend to lack the strict strength of regulation or legislation in terms of ensuring a very specific implementation. So they're more malleable, they're more changeable, but they're also sort of lack that firmness of legislation and regulation. Next slide. So there's really two types of bills that you can have in the legislature that we would refer to. There is another issue called a private act. I'm not going to talk about that here because it's a very unique usage of it, and it really isn't very pertinent to the type of issues that SCAGO would be working on. But the vast majority of bills are either government bills or private members' bills. So a government bill is introduced in the legislature, sponsored or initiated by a cabinet minister. And government bills functionally represent the execution of the priorities of government. So the mandate that government was elected on or has undertaken as government, that is them doing what they need to do in legislation to achieve the commitments that they made to the voters that elected them, or issues that come up after the fact. Just to put that in perspective, there's been basically 307 bills introduced in the current session of the legislature since July of 2018, 307. But only about 30 of those were government bills that were not directly related to COVID-19 response or were what I would call procedural. They were the budget or a red tape bill that the government does on a regular rotating basis, or to define the rules of how the legislature is going to work in that session. So only 30 of them were really government sponsored, initiated bills that were about the government undertaking big issues that they had been elected on as part of their mandate. So that could be things as big as the transformation of the healthcare system through the creation of Ontario Health, to something as small as some of the rules that were changed around alcohol retailing, or the modifications to cannabis retailing that took place recently, and really everything in between, most of those being things that you could draw a straight line back to the 2018 election and things that the Ford government campaign, or what was then the PC party under Doug Ford, campaigned on in order to win that election and made a commitment on. So that's what most of those were. The vast majority of bills that are introduced are private members' bills. So these can be initiated by any member of the legislature. Typically, a member can only have one of these bills formally in the works at a time. And more importantly, far more of these bills are introduced than are ultimately passed. The real key for that is that private members' bills are one of the most available tools that the opposition has to bring issues in front of the government. But because they don't have sufficient number of votes in our current majority government to pass any of those bills, the only private members' bills that are going to ever pass are those that the government wants to support. So, you know, the private member is going to work with the legislative drafters, the council in the legislature, to write a bill. They'll introduce that bill. That bill may get debated. It'll likely get its first reading vote. I'll talk a little bit about these terms. It'll get its first reading vote. It'll get debated. It'll get referred to a committee, and it will never go any further. That is the fate of the majority, the vast majority of private members' bills, particularly those that are initiated by the opposition, but many that are initiated by government caucus MPPs, in this case, PC party MPPs as well. There is another important rule about private members' bills that really can dictate how realistic many of them are, in that a private member's bill cannot propose to, so maybe I'll just simplify this a little. Bills that propose to spend public money have to basically be accompanied by a recommendation that is essentially from the lieutenant governor, which can only come with a government blessing, so to speak, from a government bill. So private members' bills can't propose to do anything that would spend any money. So that makes it very difficult for many private members' bills to achieve the sort of sweeping changes that they might want to introduce. And I think this is a really important thing to understand here because, particularly in the context of issues related to sickle cell disease, because we saw in the legislature this past session two competing approaches to private members' bills with very different successes. First and foremost, or not first and foremost, but first, we know that Sickle Cell Association of Ontario worked with the NDP opposition to introduce a private members bill on essentially issues related to sickle cell disease and its care in Ontario. I think it's undoubtedly that that bill raised important issues and considerations for the government. But because the bill couldn't spend public funds, it had to essentially be limited to trying to require the government to basically pass into law a sweeping mandate about standards of care that would ultimately be associated with increases to funding. And because it had that attached sort of implied funding component, and because it was an opposition initiated private members bill, which is rarely successful in a majority government, it hasn't really proceeded any further up to this point in time. On the other hand, of course, we know that Lanre and yourselves at SCAGO worked to bring forward an awareness bill, to create an awareness day. Obviously, that was less sweeping in scope, less transformative in scope than what was proposed in the other private members bill. But I think there was a recognition that that step would be a stepping stone to continue to build deeper relationships and awareness of the importance of dealing with SCD as a way to begin to build a stronger dialogue with the government, building some champions to then attack more of these issues in the years to come that really have an urgent need to address. And I think as we see here, that was a very successful approach. And I'll say even from where I'm sitting, a remarkably successful approach in many ways. Next slide. So as I said, Bill 255, the Sickle Cell Disease Awareness Day and Thalassemia Awareness Day Act 2021 is now passed, and it is now the law in Ontario that there is a Sickle Cell Awareness Day on June 19th, similarly a Thalassemia Awareness Day on May 8th. And I just want to lay out for you here just how remarkable this is. Many private members bills will, even when they are supported by the government and they are initiated by a government member with the support of the party and the caucus, can take well over a year to be passed into law. In fact, many government bills can take months and months and months to be passed into law. I don't know if I've seen many private members bills that proceeded as quickly as this bill did from first reading to what we call royal assent, which is when a bill receives the final approval from the Lieutenant Governor to become a law. So that bill had its first reading on March the 1st, which is its introduction. It passed that vote. It had a second reading and incredibly brief debate, which was agreed upon and set by the government's rules making under the House Leader, of 1 day. On the very next day, some bills wait weeks to get that second reading, on March the 2nd. It went to committee a little over a month later. It basically spent hours at committee, proceeded without any changes and minimal debate to its third reading, and I apologize, it was shouldn't be March 20th, it should be May 20th. On May 20th, it went for its third reading and debate, which took place on May the 20th, passed the same day, and a little over a week later received its royal assent. So from beginning to end, really 3 months, incredibly fast. And I think that is a testament to being an effective advocate, as we'll talk a bit as we lay it out here, of just how very key decisions that SCAGO made and how it approached this issue led to this really remarkable rapid success and a great foundation for some more positive steps and work to come in the months and years ahead. Next slide. So I'm going to pause there a little preemptively just to see if anyone's got any immediate questions before I continue into this, because I don't want to lose the thread, as this could get a little bit denser here, and I want to make sure that everyone is following along. Okay, so when we talk about how a bill becomes a law, we talk about a pre-legislative phase, and I will talk about this, I think, at a high level and briefly, because this is really about how a government bill goes through that process. A private member's bill follows a different trajectory. It's a much shorter one. And it's one where a group advocating can have a lot more direct influence on it. But of course, it comes with all the caveats of a private member's bill in terms of, is it supported by a government member, an opposition member? Does the government more broadly support it? And things of that nature. So you have all these steps in a government bill, from the very beginning of an idea to getting it on the agenda for policy development, to a cabinet submission, to going to cabinet committees, to going to approvals at the cabinet level, going with the premier's office agreeing with it, the ministry then having to actually design the bill itself, working with legislative counsel to write the bill, having to go to another committee, having to go to another cabinet approval, having then to go to the government caucus to make sure that the MPPs support it, and then ultimately to the Legislative Assembly, where there will be votes and hearings on that bill. Now, why I talk about this specifically is that this entire process, which is probably the most critical for drafting and preparing a government bill, which in a majority government is unlikely to change significantly once it reaches this final step, none of this process here necessarily involves any interaction with the public in terms of a notice of consultation, any kind of formal hearings, any kind of formal opportunity for you or a group like SCAGO to participate. And this is why being an effective advocate is so important, and continuing those ongoing conversations, whether it be with the Ministry of Health, other key ministers, even with your local MPPs, is so important, because through those relationships, you may learn about what is proceeding from the idea to the Legislative Assembly as a bill long before it gets there. And it's only going to be through those informal interactions that you will have opportunities to talk with these different groups, to bring issues to their attention before things get to that final stage, where your opportunities to change them are a lot more limited when it's in the case of a government bill. So that's really what is the key here, is that's why building good relationships with local MPPs is so important, because all this critical work is happening at a time when you aren't going to be told that it's taking place, and that you have opportunities to change it. Next slide. So that first chart is really the entirety of this first orange box in the top left, the drafting of the bill. That's all really happening behind closed doors, not necessarily secretly, because if you're an effective advocate, you will be aware of what's happening. You'll have opportunities to weigh in, but they will be informal. The bill then goes to the legislature, and this part of the process is the same for either a private member's bill, which was drafted by a single member working with the legislative council at the legislature, or a government bill, which followed that much more complicated chart. It goes to the legislature for a first and second reading. That's the tabling of the bill. So it's brought forward in its full form. The sponsor of the bill, the MPP, will explain its purpose. In the case of Bill 255, that was a co-sponsored bill. So SCAGO was able to find 2 MPPs to support that bill from the government caucus, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next section. Rudy Cachetto and Andrea Kanjan, they co-sponsored that bill. One of them using the fact that they had an immediate spot where they could introduce a private member's bill, and the other which was very interested in the issue and driving it forward. They brought it together. Members can debate the bill, the scope of it, weigh in on whether they think it's valid or merited, and other things of that nature. And then they'll vote. The first reading vote is a formality, but the second reading vote basically is to determine whether it should then go to committee for consideration. So then when the bill is referred to the committee, it's referred to a committee, a standing committee of members of the Ontario legislature from all parties, or at least from both the government and the opposition. And they will consider that bill. Now, the shape of exactly what happens can vary. most bills, especially government bills, are going to have hearings from witnesses. So there is an opportunity for interested parties to participate, to request to participate, but no guarantees if they're going to be called for a hearing. They usually can all submit written submissions, however, regardless of whether they're participating in the hearing itself. And then the members will hold a clause-by-clause consideration of the bill, where they will go through every single clause of the whole bill and decide, do we want to make any changes? And the opposition will often have a lot of changes that they'll propose. And in a majority government, few, if any, of those will ever be made. The government can also change their own bill. This is the one point in time, once they table the bill, that the government can actually go in and make changes to their bill to correct issues that they've heard about after the fact. They do it, but they don't do it a lot. So it is a difficult bridge to cross if that's sort of where you're trying to make a critical change at the last minute. The committee will then refer that back to the legislature with their recommendation. As I said, many bills get referred to committee and never go through all this process. They just sit there because if the government controls the committee, they choose which bills actually get considered by the committee and in what order. And that's why it's so remarkable that that committee process for Bill 255 only took 2 days. There were no hearings. There was no significant clause by clause. The bill was basically accepted as it was without any changes, which is a testament to the motivation of the co-sponsors, MPPs Khanjin and Cuchetto, to make sure that that bill got through the committee as quickly as possible by working with their colleagues. It then comes back to the House for a third reading. Members can suggest amendments, which are then voted on, and then finally the bill is voted on in its final form. That took place on May 20th in the case of Bill 255. It then basically goes, consideration of the Senate here is really more in a federal context. We don't have that in Ontario. It then effectively goes to the Lieutenant Governor, where it is approved, not in this case of the Governor General, but of the Lieutenant Governor in Ontario, and it becomes a law. So that Senate piece is really only in a federal context. You'd have that. That can be a huge way of slowing down things in Ottawa, but we don't have that issue in Ontario. We have what they call a unicameral legislature in Ontario. It's bicameral in Ottawa with the two houses that each have a responsibility. But royal assent is when the Lieutenant Governor approves the bill, and then it becomes law. Next slide. I mentioned committees. Standing committees are really what are most important when we're talking about bills as they go through the legislature. Those are the committees made up of different members of the legislature who hold the hearings, who can consider the clause by clause. There are also what they call executive committees. These are groups of cabinet ministers within the Premier's cabinet that have specific responsibilities, and their work is very confidential, and it happens prior to the bill being brought forward to the legislature. Next slide. There's also the regulatory process. I won't redefine regulation, as we talked about that a bit earlier, but these are the rules and orders and bylaws under a law. The laws will very clearly say what regulation-making powers exist and the type that they are. Those regulations can either be what they call Lieutenant Governor and Council regulations, which have to go to a committee of cabinet for approval. So when I talk about executive committees, it's a legislation and regulation committee of cabinet. And the other would be a minister's regulation, which a minister can do, the Minister of Health, for example, can do without having to send it to that cabinet committee for the government, not the legislature, but the government to approve it. Neither of them, though, require the approval of the legislature. Neither of them will go before the legislature for approval in any way. They'll never be voted on by MPPs. But most regulations do require public consultation. And sometimes there will be another consultation if substantial changes are made. But there usually is a public participation opportunity in regulation. Sometimes it's before the regulation is written. Other times a regulation is written and proposed, and you're responding to very specific words. But they're posted on something called either the Regulatory Registry or the Environmental Registry of Ontario. There's a set time limit of when you can respond, and usually it's done through written submission. Next slide. Okay, and I see we do have a question there. Are you able to pull that up, Kiki, without minimizing your screen? Otherwise, I'm happy to do it.
Divan, I can help with that.
Oh, great, Lanre. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have a question from Jane. She's asking, how do we begin to start from scratch at this point during the year? So as members of the Patient Advisory and Advocacy Council of the SCAGO, how would you advise us? Do we start with our local councilors, given that next year is election? She wants to know if it's too late to begin advocating with members of this party. Thank you.
I would say absolutely not. It's a perfect time to start because so much of what you are best equipped to do as a group is that awareness piece. There may be specific asks that SCAGO and Lanre, based on the work that's going on, would want to put in front of MPPs in the context of the upcoming election. You know, specific investments or specific commitments about care for patients, for example. But at the very minimum, even before that, and in context of that, building those relationships right now, not only with the MPPs, but also with, as they get identified, with candidates of the opposition parties is absolutely valuable, because you don't know what the outcome of the election will be. The MPPs may change, but in any case, you want to be able to continue that discussion going forward and build that chorus of support for the kind of things you want to do. And in fact, I think the next section will be really helpful because it will talk a little bit about what you can do right now to be effective and how you can do that. Next slide.
Sorry, Divan, before we go to the next slide, I just want to reiterate that people can put their questions and comments in the either in the chat box or in the Q&A as Divan moves forward. Thank you.
Okay, and then just talking about putting advocacy into action, and I think your question, Jane, really teased this section off very, very well. Next slide. Is, you know, we now, as I mentioned, you know, we actually, next slide, we've covered this here, but we've talked about what's been achieved already with Bill 255, but the next real milestone in the electoral calendar and in the Ontario government context is that election next year in June of 2022. We know it's going to take place in that case. There's going to be a federal election before that. A federal election is likely going to take place this fall. We're kind of all waiting to see when it'll happen. But in terms of what you can do here in Ontario, and I would say there's absolutely value to engaging your local members and candidates in the context of the federal election. As we know, SCAGO has had a lot of conversations, has some great champions federally as well. But if we're talking about Ontario, because there is a bit more lead time and it's a bit more predictable, you know, the first part is going to be defining your ask. You know, effective advocacy is going to mean knowing what you want and being realistic about your expectations. You know, what's your top priority? What's the understanding the context around it, both political, both practical, and who your audience is. Obviously, if we're talking about most of the folks on this call, it's going to be your MPP, your local MPP, or candidates for opposition parties or government party, or the government party, in this case, the PC party now, who will be running in the next election. So for much of the past number of months, the top priority was Bill 255, or what became Bill 255 and ultimately was passed. But now that Bill 255 has passed, I know that part of the work that Lanre is doing and talking with us will be about making sure there's a good, clear ask of MPPs that MPPs can actually help with. Obviously, some things are too specific, too granular. It's going to be difficult to get them activated on it or candidates activated on it. Other ones will be more straightforward. And in some cases, your ask will be less about a specific number of dollars or a specific investment or a specific policy change, but rather making sure they are educated and aware of sickle cell disease in Ontario, on the work you're doing, and on the need for more stronger steps to be taken to provide better, more comprehensive care. And then because you're trying to build, I think, the folks here, your effective role is really going to be about building relationships with MPPs that as we and SCAGO work on more specific issues, they can approach that directly. And I see a comment from Jane here, which I'll just tackle right on the immediate term. When I refer to Toronto and Ottawa, I'm referring to Toronto as where the Ontario government is located, and then Ottawa as where the federal government is located. But there are MPPs, members of provincial parliament in Ontario, located in every single community in the province, from the farthest north to the farthest south, small town, urban, suburban, rural, everywhere. So your local member will be very interested in hearing from local constituents, wherever you live. So it's just key on identifying who that person is and being prepared and equipped to go in and talk to them, to educate them, to build their support as a champion for these issues. So that's everywhere. They will work as a member, elected member in Toronto, but they have an office, sometimes several offices in their local community where they're going to meet and engage with local members. So most of them are even doing virtual meetings now. You won't have to travel to Toronto to meet with them. It'll either be virtual or you'll be at their local office in your local community. Next slide. And really that's what this is all about. It's forming relationships. It's always a successful strategy is always going to be aided by building strong, back one slide there, by building strong relationships with elected officials, with political staff members and civil servants across government. So for SCAGO, that's about not only focusing on the minister, and that's why SCAGO works not only with the Minister of Health and the Minister of Health's office, but more importantly with civil servants in the Ministry of Health that deal with these issues on a day-to-day basis. Working with SCAGO, we were able to connect with a key advisor to the Premier, who actually has family members with lived experience with sickle cell disease. And he was able to make some very astute recommendations about how to find the champions for the issue of Bill 255 for the Awareness Day. And that's why meeting with ministry officials, with MPPs, with the Premier's office is so important. It was through his advice that he informed SCAGO about the opportunity to re-engage with MPP Andrea Khanjin, who is a really effective MPP at Queen's Park, who had recently just passed a private member's bill and was looking for a new issue to become engaged on. And this was something right in her wheelhouse. And fortunately, she had some familiarity in the past with Lanre as well. So it was great because that relationship had been built earlier. Another relationship was made that connected those two dots, and it was a key contributor to the success. Similarly, it was about meeting with a whole bunch of MPPs that ultimately Rudy Cuscetto was identified as somebody who was looking for an issue to support and was really interested about what this could be and the positive change it could make. And it's about long-term relationships. You're trying to build a lot of different connections. And that's why for SCAGO, it's meeting with not only politicians, but with the officials in the Ministry of Health. And for yourselves, it's about meeting with your MPP, but also meeting with candidates running in the next election once they're identified, because some of them may be the next MPP. We'll have to see what happens in June, but there's never a downside to building those connections early. And you never know who may pop up elsewhere later on. Next slide. It's also about building that network of support. And if we talk about Bill 255, this was particularly key because it was really that doing this in conjunction with the Thalassemia Society was critical because it allowed two patient groups to come to these MPPs together and bring forward a joint request that allowed to have a bigger impact, to share the resources, to share the impact, to broaden the positive outcome that this awareness effort would have for more groups. And I think that's always an effective strategy. You know, you'll always find that government is going to listen to a coalition of voices, a chorus of voices, more than just one voice in isolation. It's always helpful. In some cases, that means working with a private sector company. You know, many patient groups work with pharmaceutical companies that support their efforts. It could be other nonprofit organizations that might not be directly related to, for example, sickle cell disease, but might have strong connections. It might be about organization representing communities that have a high prevalence of individuals living with sickle cell disease. It might be within certain communities. It might be even municipal leaders that have been very active on this. So leaders in the city of Toronto, or in the city and Peel region, or in Ottawa, or wherever in Ontario that they might be particularly active. But the more of those that can kind of come around can also help you carry on that conversation through more channels, or leverage their relationships to help move your issue forward. Next slide. And then of course, it's about also having effective materials. You want to have a note or a deck that is straightforward, that is simple and clear. It needs to be concise. There's always a challenge when you are dealing with and engaged on an issue on a day-to-day basis, that you're always going to know more than your audience. And you're always going to want to tell them more because you have a lifetime of experience and insight. They unfortunately have the 30 minutes that you're meeting with them to get captivated by your issue. And that's why the simplicity is important. You know, I think it was very clear that the request and the clarity of the request brought forward by SCAGO and the Thalassemia Society on Bill 255 was very effective, because the ask was simple, but you were able to bring forward the issue in some very specific terms about why it was important, why it needed to be dealt with in Ontario, and why this was a good stepping stone. And that really motivated MPP Cuchetto and MPP Khanjin to sponsor that bill, to see it through. And now both of them have been very clear that they don't want this to be the last thing they do. They want to continue to be champions for individuals living with sickle cell disease. And that opens the door to thinking about how can they help SCAGO, and by extension, the patients and individuals you work with, to see more positive success in the years ahead. And as much as possible, you want to have these materials ready to go, consistent. So it's, best that they're all the same regardless of who you are and who you're meeting with, and that you share it with them ahead of time, because sometimes they're going to get a chance to review that, and if they've reviewed it before you have the meeting, all the better, because you don't need to take them through it step by step. They already have some awareness of what you want to talk about. Next slide. And in terms of creating the materials, there's clear do's and don'ts. You want to think about presenting it like a story. There needs to be a narrative to what you're sharing. That doesn't mean it is an individual story, although that can be very powerful, but it does certainly mean that there's a clear beginning, middle, and end to what you're trying to present. You want to try and anticipate the questions and issues that they are going to bring up, and try to address them ahead of time. So instead of waiting for them to ask you questions you think they might ask, answer them in the course of your material as much as you can. You want to be very much about simplifying. You want to avoid too much complexity, even when these are complex issues. You want to avoid acronyms. You want to avoid technical descriptions wherever possible, and really try and hone in on the clearest and simplest message and evidence you can. And you cannot assume that they are knowledgeable about the topic. You almost have to assume complete ignorance of the topic, and take them through a relatively easy to understand path to what you're trying to achieve. That doesn't mean you can assume they don't know, what a hospital is, but you have to assume they're not going to understand, for example, exactly what sickle cell disease is, how it's manifested in individuals, and the challenges that they are facing on a day-to-day basis. Next slide. In terms of conducting an effective meeting, so when you are meeting with your MPP in this case, or a candidate who's running in next year's election, an effective meeting isn't difficult. You want to, first of all, if it's yourself or a group, you want to have a little bit of a game plan going in ahead of time. So you want to prepare and make sure you know who's talking about what and when and how. In terms of conducting that meeting, you want to stick to the point. You want to do your homework, understand the MPP, read up a little bit on their biography and the issues they've been active on. Try to find ways to appeal to their goals and interests. We certainly learned in the work with MPP Cuchetto that he's very invested in the redevelopment of the Mississauga Hospital, which is a place his mother worked for many, many years. So it's interesting to know that that's something that resonates with him, and to think about ways that sickle cell disease might integrate with things that they're passionate about. You want to be concise. You want to give examples. Those local examples or lived experience examples are really powerful. Really take the big picture issues down to a very personal level, because those are the things that will often stick with an MPP, especially if they're local. don't fake an answer. If you don't know an answer, if you don't have the specific information they're asking for, always say, that you don't know, but that you'll get back to them. You'll follow up with the member of their staff to give them that clarity and that information. Always better to do that. They'll never be offended. Definitely take notes on what you learn. Things that they bring up, opportunities, ideas, people to talk to. Always take that information and share it, in this case with Lanre and the advisory council here, because it will shape the thinking about how to proceed going forward. There could always be a brilliant kernel of information in any meeting that you have. And of course, leave your materials behind. In this day and age, it's easy to share them by email. If you do bring a paper copy and it's an actual physical meeting, which seems to perhaps be coming again, then absolutely share a hard copy as well, but certainly share it by email for sure. Next slide. And as we said, that conversation theme, if you want to break it down into a sort of a simple 1, 2, 3, you want to talk about, what's the local experience, your individual experience, individuals in the community's experience, what's the provincial context, what's the underlying issue in Ontario that has created this challenge or created this opportunity, and then what are you asking for? In some cases, that first meeting, the asks may not be substantially specific. It may be mostly about building awareness and wanting to know that you can continue the conversation with them on some more specific opportunities to support individuals in the community living with SCD. But it might be very specific. And so depending on it, that's what you use for your ask. And those asks would not come out of the blue sky. It's something that SCAGO would determine as an organization to be their priority. And then you would certainly know what that was when you went to talk with your MPP. Next slide. Following up after the meeting, and I've noted this, but I should definitely say at the beginning that reaching out to request a meeting for your MPP really is not intimidating. I know that Lanre's done it so many times now that it probably feels like, breathing or eating at this point in time, but especially with your local MPP, if you're a local member of the community, this should be no intimidation. An email to them and following up on that email. You're not harassing them. You're not upsetting them. That's what they're there for. They have staff that is their job. It's easy that, SCAGO can provide and help prepare a very short little email that you could just, change to reflect your own name and things of that nature to make that request. But very simple. Don't overthink it. As long as they clearly know who you are, what the purpose of the meeting is, and how to contact you and how to confirm those details, your availability, and being as flexible as possible is important. Then that should be all that's really required. It's really straightforward and it's easy to find that information for how to contact them. You should always also follow up after your meeting. Keep the dialogue going. You can't just meet once and never contact them again. You want to email them to be thankful, remind them of the key points, reattach your materials, and find those opportunities to reconnect. If there is an event happening locally to deal with individuals living with sickle cell, invite them. If there's a local clinic that you think they should visit, work with the local clinic leadership to invite them. Find any opportunity you have to reconnect, even if it's informal. If you know they're going to be at a community event that you're likely going to attend, find the opportunity to go there and find the opportunity to speak with them and remind them that you met with them. Those are all very, very simple things to do. They're elected officials. They're used to people stopping and talking with them. And if you're having a positive conversation, that's never going to upset them. In fact, those are often the highlight of their day, is meeting with local constituents who are pleasant, who are happy to see them, and who want to talk to them about positive ways that they can help make a difference locally. Next slide. Okay, and so that's really the conclusion of the presentation here. And of course, I've seen a couple of comments come up in the chat and the Q&A. Lanre, I don't know if there's any questions there that we haven't already covered.
Thank you, Devon. There is no questions that we've not covered, but we still have some time. So I think maybe we can open it up to say, if anyone has any question to ask Devon or Kiki, they could ask at this time. You can raise your hand and I will be able to unmute you, if that's okay. Let's see. But in the meantime, we have some comments in the chat box. So one comment from Jane is that the social climate too has an impact. What is going on in the world? The past 2 years, more and more people are realizing and being more informed about social issues directly affecting marginalized groups. So this is truly a time for change. We also have a comment from Marie that what else can we do if we do not receive a response from our MPP's office after requesting a meeting with them through an email? So that's a question, actually.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a good question. And what I would certainly say is always make sure your request is as clear as possible. You know, the more that people understand, you know, who you are, how you are connected locally, and what the context of what you're wanting to talk about is, you know, the clearer your request is, the better. Because sometimes if they get requests where they can't quite figure out what the point is, they go to the bottom of the list. But they also get a lot of requests. So I think the key is you want to follow up regularly by email, but also pick up the phone and just be persistent. If you are persistent but not aggressive, I would say that most of the time you will ultimately be successful, unless for some reason you've had, you know, 15 meetings with them already or something to that effect. If it's the first time meeting with them, you know, polite persistence will get you the meeting. You just need to make sure to keep it up. If you make one email request and never follow up on it, you may not hear from it again. And we send plenty of such requests to MPPs, and if we just sent them the one time and never followed up, they wouldn't get back to us either. And so it is about polite persistence. And that doesn't mean going back every day, but you know, if you give them 4 or 5 days after that first email, follow up with another email. If you don't hear something in 2 or 3 days, pick up the phone and give them a call. Call them then the next day and leave a voicemail. It's just, you know, just continuing that polite persistence. As long as they, you know, that will demonstrate that you're eager to meet with them, and hopefully you will get somebody to take this seriously, and then they'll understand why you want to meet with them and what the local considerations are. I won't lie, there are some MPPs that are not great with this, and that's unfortunate in some cases, but the vast majority of them I think are pretty good, and it just takes a little bit of persistence to find some time on their busy schedules.
And if I may add to what Devon said, just while we were working on the Bill 255, we asked every one of you to write your MPP for support for the bill. And many of you, is the first time you are meeting your MPP. For some, you've already known them, but engaging them to ask for their support for the bill was also very helpful in helping us to achieve the success that we did achieve. And so it's very important, as Devon said, that you know your MPP. You make yourself known to your MPP, you book an appointment. I mean, I know before the COVID, I always say, book an appointment, walk in their office, and let them know, you know, who you are their constituent, and this is what you're all about, right? And building that relationship will definitely be useful when we do need the help. We have Jane raising her hand, so I'm gonna let her talk. 1 second. Jane, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Devin and Ms. Lanre. So I guess you might have already touched on this, but it was just continuing with Marie's question, which is there ever like a point where persistence can be a negative thing, if you understand what I'm saying? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, like, what if we're in the year, we've tried to contact a particular MPP or elected official, and we have been persistent, but we're not getting any response, or maybe we get a response and then they're not following up with us. Do we need to change our approach? Like, do we need to change our approach, or like, are there different approaches to being persistent, I guess?
Well, I think one of them, Jane, and thank you for that. One of them is certainly one that Lanre mentioned, which is a little more challenging now. I would still say it's at a time now where it's worthy of considering it. which is, of course, is to pop into their office during office hours and politely, follow up on the request, and especially if you've sent another one recently, to see what the status might be, and to just make them aware that, I'm a local constituent. I really would like to have an opportunity to meet on behalf of the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario. We recently worked with MPP Kanjan, MPP Cuchedo, and other members to pass a private members bill. So, they're aware that you're, a serious entity, a serious organization that has done work, and you want to talk about it locally. At the same time, I would also say, just continuing that polite persistence. I think if it's polite persistence, there's never a time in which it becomes counterproductive. I think it can be frustrating, but it's only going to be counterproductive potentially if suddenly, you are angrily showing up to their constituency office and causing an issue that gets into the local news or something like that. And that wasn't some sort of a strategic decision by SCAGO or something to that effect, which I think is highly unlikely. What also can be the case is if your most immediate local member is not being very responsive, particularly if you don't live in a rural area, there might be neighboring MPPs. And if you're living in the general area, it's still very valuable to go and build a relationship with those folks, because the next MPP over might be more responsive and more engaged, and frankly, probably a better champion for this issue potentially than somebody who is just, after great effort, not making any attempt to engage with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Divan. Any other questions or comments for Divan? Well, if
I would maybe just say one thing, which you note to your comment, Lanre, about those individuals who reached out to their MPPs, met with them about Bill 255. If you haven't done so, now is a great opportunity to reach out to them again, to talk to them and remind them about, thank you to them for being engaged on this issue, that we saw Bill 255 pass and receive royal assent to become law, that now the 19th is going to be Sickle Cell Awareness Day, 19th of June, to update them on the success and to continue that conversation. It's a great opportunity for a pleasant conversation to have another meeting about that, whether it's in the summer or in a couple months from now. It's always good to loop back and let them know where, if they've indicated they were going to be helpful, that their help was appreciated. It's a great way to continue building relationship. I know that Lanre in particular is very good at making sure that those who've been helpful are reminded of how much that's appreciated.
I wanted to thank you, Divan, and to add to what Divan said there, that it's very important, even those who did not maybe have the opportunity to send a letter of, send a request to their MPP to support the Bill 255, thanking them and informing them that the bill has passed, and thank them for their support, and reminding them that you are their constituent and what sickle cell disease is, I think is very important. So for those on this call, please, either if you did send a request for support or not, it's great to do a follow-up. And from SCAGO, we will send everyone a sample, a template that you can use to, to send to your MPP in thanking them and informing them. Even though we've done that to all the MPPs and so on, it's good that you do it to, you send it individually to your own MPP. And that's one way also of building that relationship that Divan is talking about, and for them to know you and what you do and what is important to you as their constituent.
And it's a great opportunity too. In the case of Bill 255, it was a voice vote, which means it wasn't a recorded vote. They didn't record how every member voted on the bill, which is what usually happens on a bill that's broadly popular and it's not controversial, and all the parties just they do a voice vote where everybody says aye, and anybody who says nay, and then they'll say, oh, the ayes have it, which means technically everyone supported it. So, even if you don't know how they voted, it doesn't matter, because it was a voice vote, and I don't think there were any nays that I'm aware of. So you can basically say, we appreciate your support, because in a sense, it's true, whether they were in the building at that time or not.
Thank you. We have a comment in the chat box. We have one of our guests from Nigeria who is actually joining us to also learn about advocacy. She said, well done, SCAGO. Are there any requirements for patient advocacy? Divan, would you know what she meant, or can we ask Femi to?
Well, I would say in terms of requirements for patient advocacy, I would say that varies in terms of formal requirements. That can vary very much across, you know, different countries, different provinces, different jurisdictions. They may have rules around advocacy and lobbying and how groups do that and don't do that. There are rules in Ontario. They vary depending on what kind of an organization you are, how much advocacy you're doing, and the types of advocacy you're doing. So I would certainly say, you know, if you are in another country, in another province, it's worth understanding what the local rules might be and whether they might apply to you.
Very well said. Before we go to Ms. Doreen, who has raised her hands for a question, I just also want to add that I always say that, you know, a lot of people, especially in the sickle cell community across the world, not only in Canada, are involved in advocacy because, of course, they have a story around the disease. But I always advise people to develop this, you know, the necessary skill set and expertise in order to be effective advocates, and attending trainings and learning more about what can make you a better advocate. And I think it's also a good step. So great that you're joining us, Femi, to learn more. I will go to Ms. Doreen, and I will allow her to speak now. Thank you. Ms. Doreen, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon to both you and Devin. Ms. Lanre. Devin, thank you for an excellent presentation. Well deserved and well said, and I'm sure it will make a difference in a lot of our patient population and those who are advocating or even want to advocate, to give them guidance as to how to move forward. Just to add to what you both said in regards to reaching out to the MPPs to say thank you. Another thing I'd like to say in that mode as well is that September is considered Sickle Cell Month. And that's a very important month to create that awareness. So SCAGO, fortunately for us, they're so well organized in putting out a lot of events around time like September to recognize and create more awareness on the disease itself. So it's also an opportunity to make sure the MPP be aware of this, that September is Sickle Cell Month, and if there's any sessions being held, that is going to help create more awareness around the patient population and what is it SCAGO do. This is a great opportunity for us to also invite them and let them be aware of it as well. Another thing I'd like to make, comment I'd like to make as a suggestion, when these MPP are running and they're campaigning, make ourselves available and visible to them to give them support, because in giving, most likely we will receive when our turn comes in order to pursue them, in order to get assistance to help us push our cause forward and to create more awareness on the disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Doreen. I just want to mention that Ms. Doreen is the vice chair of SCAGO's board. Thank you so much for joining us today and for those comments. Devon, I don't know if you have anything to say to comments from Ms. Doreen.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Doreen. You're absolutely right. You should continually be thinking of those great opportunities for just positive reminders. You're absolutely right. Positive reminders. It's a good opportunity to engage your local members, invite them to participate in things, even if they don't. Just taking that effort to reach out to them might be a reason to have another meeting, have a connection. Always a good idea. It's not wasted time at all.
Thank you. Do we have any other question or comment? If not, I'd like to invite the chair of the Patient Advocacy and Advocacy Council, Ms. Marie Ms. Marie Pascal Poku to perhaps give one comment or two, and I will then pass it to Ms. Doreen to also provide a final remark before we close the session. Thank you.
Hello, hi everyone. Hi, good morning, Devan. And I would like just to say thank you for this very useful presentation and training, and also thank you, Ms. Lanre, for organizing this for SCAGO members and also for PAC members. I learned a lot, and I'm sure others have as well. And I will, as PAC members, and I'm sure as SCAGO members, we will surely like to implement the knowledge that we have acquired in our strategies to advocate for better care and for better to advocate for better care for people with sickle cell disease through government officials. I would also like to ask if there's any way that if we have any questions or concerns that we'll be able to contact you further.
Certainly, any questions that come from this presentation, if somebody thinks of something later today or next week, certainly send them by email to Lanre, and I know she will share them with us, and we're happy to provide some thoughts to any of those questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Marie. Thank you so much. I would like to recognize again the presence of our board members, Dr. Melanie Kirby-Harlan. I wanted to say that this is one doctor that is not confined to the walls of the hospital, but has been part of our journey in advocacy when we go to Queen's Park and Ottawa and wherever we need to be. Thank you, Dr. Kirby, for being on this training. We have our treasurer, Ms. Moji, on the call as well. We also have, of course, as I mentioned earlier, Ms. Doreen Alexander, who is the vice chair for our board. Thank you so much. And I believe I saw Mr. Harby as well. Thank you so much. We have our PAC members. Thank you. You all have made today another insightful training opportunity. I wanted to thank also Devan and Kiki for always being there, working with us, helping. Sometimes you may know what you need to do, but you just don't have the capacity because you're doing everything else. But Devan has always been the go-to that I always say, Devan, can you draft this for me? Can you do this for me? Can we talk about this? Always very, very helpful. And it's just been a pleasure working with the Counsel Public Affairs. Thank you so much. And on this note, I will pass it to the Vice Chair of the Board, Ms. Doreen Alexander, for closing remarks. And I want to thank everyone again for joining. And I want to give you back some of your time today. We're supposed to finish at 12, but it's at 11:35, so you can take back some of your Saturday. But thank you again. So, Ms. Doreen, I hope I need to. Ms. Doreen, you're on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lanre. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. What a day. On behalf of the organization, Devon and Ms. Lanre, I'd just like to express our gratitude and to say thank you on behalf of SCAGO, the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario, the Board of Directors, and all the tireless volunteers who work so hard and so diligent to create more awareness and provide the necessary education to inform the general public and all level of government, even though we are designated in the province of Ontario. The beauty about COVID is that it allowed us to extend ourselves beyond the borders of the province of Ontario, because many people are able to participate in many of the sessions that we do held in order to create that awareness. But Devon, truly, it's been a very informative and effective day. in regards to advocacy, and advocacy is such a key thing to be on top of. So the awareness of how to get things done, how to reach the government level, our policymakers, and to make things happen for us who support the patients and family population that we are so much committed to serve and to assist for better health and for better support where living quality life is concerned. So you presenting this today really empower us as volunteers, create more awareness for us to say, okay, this is what we need to do. This is where we need to go. This is how we need to reach out. It has been a very informative session, as I say, and I just want to thank you again, and know that your day to us has been so profitable. And I just want to say, you know, hopefully in the future, as things progress, you'll be able to come back and provide even a more advanced and even a more extended way to reach beyond the areas that we're reaching right now. I know we talk a lot about the government, but also those private sectors in the community that can support us. So once again, thank you, thank you, thank you. And Ms. Lanre, words cannot express your leadership. Thank you so much for being who you are and how you stand with us to lead us along the path to make things work for the patient population and their families that we serve. And you guys have an enjoyable afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Doreen. And on that note, we will close the training today. And thank you again to Counsel and everyone that attended to this session. Have a wonderful